As a kid, there was this show I always watched. It was called The Twinkle Show. My mum would always turn it on for me after she watched the news. It was a great show. The host's name was Mr. Twinkle. Mr. Twinkle was a nice guy, or so I thought. It was a Saturday morning. My mum went out to get groceries, so it was just me and my older brother, Lucas. Lucas turned on the TV and switched the channel to 6, where the Twinkle Show was aired. When the show started, we thought something was wrong. Instead of the theme song being happy and welcoming, the song was played backwards. But we didn't think anything of it. It was probably a glitch. The theme song stopped playing, then Mr. Twinkle appeared. "Hey kids," Mr. Twinkle grinned. "Today we're going to learn about kindness." There was a box in the middle of the scene. The box opened and Danny the Dino, one of Mr. Twinkle's friends, hopped out of the box. Danny was a happy dinosaur, but today he didn't look too happy, and I wondered why. "Kindness is the key to friendship," Mr. Twinkle sang as he danced around. Out of nowhere, Mr. Twinkle got out a gun and shot Danny in the head. I was shocked, especially Lucas. He started to vomit on the floor. "See, kids," Mr. Twinkle sneered as he gripped onto the gun. "Kindness is the key to friendship." I quickly turned off the TV and ran to Lucas's side. My eyes were wet from tears. The image of Danny's body was stuck in my head. It was disturbing and horrifying. My mum came back a few minutes later with groceries in her hand. She dropped them as soon as she saw Lucas. "What happened?" she asked me worriedly. It was the show," I blurted out. "Mr. Twinkle shot Danny the Dino in the head." My mum, confused, turned on the TV. Instead, Mr. Twinkle and Danny were reciting the ABCs, like none of the brutal things had ever happened. "I don't see anything wrong, sweetie." My mother patted my head and helped Lucas up. "You must be seeing things." But my mum was right. We probably were seeing things. Our whole lives we had seen Mr. Twinkle do nothing violent, so we probably were just tired at the time. But still, it made us sick. Every time I think about it, I either start vomiting or start to tear up. Since that day, Lucas and I promised each other to never watch that show again, and we never did. Well, until I reached adulthood. I had adopted a son, Julius. Since I wasn't sure if what I saw was true, I forbid him from watching the show, though he'd always come home to complain about how his friends would watch it. But one day when I was busy at my workplace, he watched the show home alone. When I came home, I saw him crying on the floor. "I promise not to watch the show. I promise not to watch the show," he kept repeating, yet he kept his promise. What I wasn't ready for was facing the Twinkle Show again. My occupation was a police officer, and ever since I started working, there were plenty of cases about the Twinkle Show. Apparently the kids were complaining to their parents about it, so the parents took action. Yet the sheriff thought that they were exaggerating. Every case a parent filed, they would all stack up like piles of bricks. The sheriff looked at them and said they were wasting his time. One day I was on my break, and so was everyone else, but the sheriff called for a meeting anyway. "Parents say that their children have seen a lot of disturbing things on this show." He took out a file. Murder, violence. He put the file down and looked around the room. Finally, he actually did something about it. "I want to see the show for myself." He clenched his fists. "But if what they said was real, we need to take action." We all agreed. His assistant came in with a TV. She placed it down and turned it to channel 6. We waited for 5 minutes until the show started. It showed Mr. Twinkle in a circus. "Hey kids, today we're in a circus." The second he saw the police, he looked worried. Throughout the whole show, Mr. Twinkle would pause and look at us, and then go back to what he was doing. The sheriff didn't notice, though. He was too focused on his actions. After the show ended, the sheriff stood up and looked around the room. "Looks pretty normal to me. Let's try something else." The sheriff shifted his head at me. "Deborah, you have a child, don't you?" "Yes, sir," I answered. "Bring him over," he stated, not knowing why he needed him. I called him over anyway. A few hours later he arrived. The sheriff greeted him. "What's your name, young man?" "Julius." He looked around the room while he fiddled with his fingers. "We need you for something." Sheriff took a deep breath. "We need you to watch the Twinkle show." The tension in the room was indescribable. It made my hands sweat. My son was too afraid to do it, and he pleaded him to ask someone else. "Don't worry," Sheriff patted his head. "We have a camera in the room, so if anything happens, we would know." Julius thought for a moment. "If you do it, you'll receive toys," the sheriff added. This somehow convinced him, for he quickly went into the room. Everyone was back in the meeting room. On the TV, it showed Julius sitting on the couch, still fiddling with his fingers. Then the show started. It started with the theme song playing backwards. Then Mr. Twinkle popped up. Mr. Twinkle flashed his teeth, but they slowly turned sharp. The Mr. Twinkle every kid knew was slowly turning into a monster. Black hands emerged behind Mr. Twinkle's back. They started to reach toward Julius, but he suddenly stopped. Mr. Twinkle looked at the camera at the corner of the room. Angry, the TV glitched, then it was turned off. What in the world? I never saw the sheriff this scared. He was literally shaking. "It saw the camera," one of my clients exclaimed. And that's when we realized it can see us through the screen. That's why the adults had never seen anything suspicious, because it could see if the kids were alone. After making this discovery, the whole news network was talking about this violent show, how we shouldn't let kids watch it, and how Mr. Twinkle wasn't a person, but a monster. We started to track down Mr. Twinkle. A few hours of searching, we found an abandoned studio. Police forces were sent to the location, with one of them holding a camera. They went inside looking for Mr. Twinkle. They searched half of the studio until they reached the stage. Mr. Twinkle was standing there, having their back turned to them. "Get on the ground!" one of them spat, gripping onto the gun. Mr. Twinkle laughed as he clenched his fist and asked if they even had any manners. The police force threatened to shoot him if he didn't listen to them twice. Mr. Twinkle still didn't cooperate, so they shot him, but he was still standing. "Ouch, that hurt," he sneered. The bullets that were shot at him were shot back at the police force. They all dropped dead. Tears went down my eyes. It reminded me of the Danny incident all over again. Mr. Twinkle noticed the camera on the floor. He stared at it for a solid 30 seconds. His head twitched the whole way through. He laughed. "You were filming me, huh?" His smile stretched across his face. It creeped out everyone, especially the sheriff, who was on the floor having a panic attack. Mr. Twinkle stopped staring, and his head started twitching even more. "Remember, kids," his smile got bigger, "kindness is the key to friendship." Mr. Twinkle broke the camera, never to be seen again. It's been a few years since I've seen Mr. Twinkle and his little show. He might still be out there showing his inappropriate content to kids. The thinking of it made me sick. So let me look at this in a good way. I don't have to see him again.